Hello, everyone. Welcome to the official last lunch of 2025. And I really couldn't think of a better way to end it than by having Rumya from the Key Biscayne Community Foundation. Happy 2026. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Rumya.
Thank you guys for coming today to our last Citizen Science lecture of the year. I'm pretty certain most of you know who I am, but for those of you that don't, my name is Rumya. I am the Director of Environmental Science for the Key Biscayne Community Foundation. As Roxy mentioned, we do these lectures once a month, and usually I have guest speakers, but if I can't find somebody, or if there's something that I want to geek out about, then I give the presentation myself. Today we're going to talk about 20 animals that you've probably never heard of. Now, it's entirely possible there might be a couple animals in here that some of you have heard of before. One in particular that I'm thinking of. Probably the majority of these animals, most of you haven't heard of. At least that's what I'm hoping, because we want to keep it interesting. The world is a very strange place, and we don't get to see a lot of it. Just a general question, how many species of animals do you think there are? And that includes insects. Millions is correct. So far scientists have described about 1.5 million species, including insects. And honestly, that was a much lower number than I thought. But that's just what they've described. That doesn't mean that's what exists. The estimate is that there's probably 8 to 10 million species of animals and insects. Now, none of this is including plants. That would make it too much. Plants will be an entirely different presentation. But 8 to 10 million species of animals and insects in the world, probably. And honestly, to me, I feel like that estimate is low, but who knows, really. Every time they do some kind of deep sea dive, they discover new species every single time. So I feel like it's probably more than that. But today, we're just going to talk about 20 of them, and ones that don't generally make the mainstream media, so chances are you've never heard of most of them. So this one, you've all heard of. This is a bottlenose dolphin. When you're lucky, sometimes we see them off the coast of Bill Bags or in Bear Cut. They kind of hang around, very playful. We know all about dolphins. What I'm going to talk about, however, is a very similar type of animal called the Amazon river dolphin. They are very interesting. There are actually, I think, 5 species of river dolphins worldwide. What's interesting about them is that they are 100% freshwater. They only live in freshwater rivers. They cannot survive in saltwater like all the other dolphin species that we know. They are the largest of the river dolphins. Obviously, they live in the Amazon. There's the Ganges river dolphin that lives in India. The Yangtze river dolphin, which is suspected to be extinct, but they're not sure yet, lives in China. And there's a few other species around the world, but not very many. The Amazon river dolphin is the largest, topping out at a little over 8 feet, and they can be up to 400 pounds. Some really interesting things about them, they have a much more flexible neck than any other dolphin species. Their neck vertebrae are not fused, so not only can they turn their neck like up and down and left and right, they can make a complete 90-degree turn to either side with their head. Some of us can't even do that. I can barely do that. But because of that, they have a 180-degree view of their surroundings. The most interesting part about them is that they change color as they age. As they grow up, they brush against each other, they fight, they brush against other things. They also, when they get excited, they blush. And eventually, they turn pink. That is not Photoshopped, that's not AI, that is a real picture of an Amazon river dolphin. And when they blush, and it's the males in particular, when they get excited, they get even pinker. Now, if you look in this picture, there's another dolphin right there that's still gray. It hasn't changed yet. Or hasn't started changing. Just so you know, I'm going to be going through these very quickly. If I spend 2 minutes per animal, that's already 40 minutes, and I'm already way past that. So some of the other ones I'm going to go through a little faster. That is the pink Amazon river dolphin. Next, Batfish. By the way, there's no real order to these animals. I just did alphabetical because I couldn't come up with a better system. So batfish are one of my favorites. They're so ridiculous looking. A lot of these animals don't really seem real. This is a picture I took in Belize. The grouchiest batfish you've ever seen in your life. That is a red-lipped batfish, named for obvious reasons. They don't really know why these guys have red lips. Not all of them do. They think it might be for mating, but it's not really clear. They are a type of anglerfish, which you may have heard of anglerfish before. They're the ones with the lure that hangs off their face. That most of those live in the deep ocean. Batfish can live anywhere, on average, from 500 feet to 5,000 feet deep. But that's just the average. They can also be as far as 10,000 feet deep. And the one that I had the picture of just a moment ago, I caught at like 20 feet. That was in the mangroves in Belize. So they're kind of all over. And generally you find them on the eastern side of the Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific. So far we've only described 9 species of batfish. There's probably more than that. They are not good swimmers. You can probably guess that just based on their shape. They're not really shaped very aerodynamic. The reason they're flattened though is because they like to lay flat in the sand, and sometimes they bury themselves because they are ambush predators. So they hide and they kind of jump out and like suck in prey when they come too close. But their fins, as you can see, are adapted actually to walking rather than to swimming. One of the naturalists that studied them described their ability to swim appears like a cow drowning. I thought that was a little bit harsh. I was like, they're a little better than that, but they definitely like to walk. They prefer to walk. So this is just a quick video just showing them just walking around. It's like a really ugly puppy. So, I'm going to quickly talk about a dinosaur. So there has been a lot of evidence recently that a lot of dinosaurs actually did have feathers. A lot of evidence that birds are descended from dinosaurs, or at least related. This is a dinosaur that was recently discovered, Corythoraptor jacobsi. It is very tall, I believe about 8 to 10 feet tall. Obviously it can't fly, its wings are too small for that, but it is feathered. The interesting thing about this is it closely resembles a modern day bird. So if there was any question about birds being related to dinosaurs, I think this bird kind of proves it. So this is the cassowary. Now this is one that I think some of you may have actually heard of. It is a large flightless bird. It is also related to the ostrich, but very, distantly, or not distantly, but very far back. They can be about 6 feet tall, that they're tallest, which, I'm not even 6 feet tall, so that's frightening. They do have this huge crest on their head that is mostly used for temperature regulation. It gives off heat when they're overheating. It also can hold heat and heat their blood when it's cold outside. They have this talon that is 5 inches long on one of their digits, one of their fingers. See, all the other ones, these are short little talons, and then there's that one giant dagger talon that they have, and they can do serious damage with it. There have been hundreds of cassowary injuries since the year 1900. Only 2 recorded deaths from 1900 until now. One in like the early 1900s, I think 1928 or something, and it was a man in Australia got attacked by a cassowary. And one in 2019 here in Florida. Who's surprised? Not me. They can also run up to 30 miles an hour, so just best to kind of stay out of their way. And finally, so aside from the way they look with their crazy like weapon hands and like giant crest on their head, here's another way you can tell that they are definitely dinosaurs. So imagine taking a walk along the edge of a nice forest and you hear that coming out of the forest. I would die instantly. I wouldn't need the cassowary for that. So while we're on the subject of dinosaurs, the coelacanth. This is a very interesting species of lobe-finned fish. Lobe-finned fish, incidentally, are more closely related to amphibians and reptiles than they are to ray-finned fish, which are most of the fish that you see. So ray-finned fish have proliferated quite a lot more in the more recent geologic history. But lobe-finned fish still exist, and they are a much more ancient species, not species of fish. There's a lot of different species of lobed fish, but a more ancient genus of fish. The coelacanth in particular appeared in the fossil record from about 410 million years ago to 66 million years ago. And then they disappeared from the fossil record, so they were assumed that 66 million years ago is when they went extinct. And then, all of a sudden, a museum curator was visiting an African fish market in 1938, and she found a fisherman that was selling a coelacanth. And she recognized it immediately. She had seen them in the museum where she was the curator. But to be sure, she called a friend of hers who was an ichthyologist, somebody who studies fish. They came, they looked at it, took samples, x-rays, all that stuff, and 100% it was a coelacanth, and that was in 1938. So this is a more modern day picture of a man holding a coelacanth that he caught while fishing. And so since then, since they realized, oh, they actually still exist, they've done a lot more research and they've actually found them. And that is probably about a 6-foot-long coelacanth in the deep ocean. They live about 200 meters down, possibly deeper than that, and they don't really come up to the surface much, so it's very rare that they are caught. And we don't know why they disappeared from the fossil record, since clearly they're still here. But it was a very, very exciting find, because we literally found not just an extinct animal, like something that we thought was extinct, and it's like, oh, it's actually not extinct, we were wrong. This is basically a dinosaur that we thought was gone a long time ago. Next is the desert rain frog. This is one of my favorites. They are basically little bubbles with feet. First of all, desert and frog, it's kind of an oxymoron. Frogs need water to live. Deserts don't have water. But the desert rain frog has really, really strange ways of dealing with this. So he's just a grumpy little bubble. They are only found on a very narrow strip of land in Southeast Africa. You can see right here. So part of it, about 2/3 in Namibia, and the other 1/3 in South Africa. And they are only found on this coastline right here, between the ocean, and then it's walled in by very tall sand dunes. The area gets almost no water, 1 to 2 inches of rain a year, but it does get a lot of fog. It gets trapped there because of the sand dunes. It rolls in from the coast, from the ocean, and then the sand dunes kind of block it from going further. So it's a very foggy area, and that's where they get almost all of their moisture. Because there is no real water, like as we are used to having water, there are no pools of water, so they can't have tadpoles. Their babies are born from the eggs into immediately little froglets. So they are born ready to go, ready to not hop so much because they're too fat to hop, so ready to walk around. They also make a very interesting war cry if you startle them or if they're calling for mates. One of my favorite things also. He's basically an angry potato. So next, we have the devil's hole pupfish. Now, pupfish are a very interesting type of animal. They are extremophiles, which basically means they are designed to live in extreme environments. So pupfish in particular are known to live in places like salt flats, desert streams, hot springs, which can be, over 100 degrees sometimes. They're very, very strange fish. These are areas that fish normally can't survive. If anybody here has kept a fish tank, you know that keeping the temperature consistent is super important because, I don't know about you, but my fish, if I look at them cross-eyed, they just die. So the fact that you have fish that can live in like boiling water is kind of insane. Now, so that's pupfish in general. The devil's hole pupfish is a very specific species of pupfish that lives in one small cavern in the Mojave Desert called Devil's Hole. And it is about 60 feet long and about 10 feet wide and 134 meters deep. So it's a very deep hole, but they only live in the top of like 20 to 24 meters. It's a very, very extreme way of living, and any small change within that cavern can affect their entire species population. In 1952, the Supreme Court, I worded this a little badly. I believe it was already considered a national monument, but in 1952, there was a court case where basically somebody sued the agriculture business because they were pumping out too much groundwater. And what that was doing was lowering the water level within Devil's Hole. The issue with that is that there is one specific rock ledge inside that cavern that grows algae on it, and that is a critical source of food for the Devil's Hole pupfish. So and it's right at the top. So if the water level drops too low, they can't reach that food, and their entire population can crash. And that has happened a few times, both naturally and not naturally. So the Supreme Court actually ruled that because it is a national monument, their water level has to be conserved. So the Devil's Hole pupfish in particular has become a very sore spot for a lot of people in the agriculture business, and just people that are like, this is a waste of money, why are we protecting them? Like, let them go extinct because they're clearly like a ridiculous fish that we're trying to keep alive. They are very pretty, but they're little. They're only about 2 to 3 inches. They do counts constantly, monthly counts of their population. It peaked several years ago at like 550 individuals or something. And it's never really gotten higher than that since they've been monitored. This year it dropped to, I think, 38 in April of 2025. That's not the lowest it's been, but it is concerning. But they have people that literally their entire job is to monitor and protect and conserve the Devil's Hole pupfish.
Where is it located?
The Mojave Desert in Nevada. This is a picture of it. So you can see it's long. It's about 60 feet long, and then this part is about 10 feet wide. And then this right here, you can see all the algae growing. That's the algae shelf that is their food source. Yes. Sorry, what? I couldn't hear. Oh, thank you. The water temperature is about 90 degrees, a little over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So, it's like tepid bath water. Maybe a little more than tepid. It's very warm. Something that you probably wouldn't be comfortable in for more than an hour. Eider ducks. So eider ducks are not extremophiles. They're not crazy looking. They're ducks. They're not, they're very pretty. They're very sleek looking. I think, might be the only one in this entire list that's not endangered. But they're interesting. They breed in the Arctic, which I find interesting for a duck, honestly, just because I don't really picture ducks being cold weather animals like that. But you find them along the northern coast of Europe, North America, like in Canada, and then also in Siberia. They breed up in the Arctic. And they are snowbirds, so they do fly south for the winter, but they only fly as far south as temperate weather. They don't come down to the tropics. That's too warm for them. The Farne Island population is a pretty stable, large population. I think around 1,000 or so breeding pairs. It has been legally protected, on the books, legally protected since the year 676. I didn't leave a 1 off of that. That is the year 676 AD, which is probably the oldest environmental protection law that has ever existed. They did used to harvest their down for coats and things like that. Now we use goose down more often. It is still used, and it is considered a luxury item. It's very expensive, but it's also harvested sustainably. So they pull their down out like any other goose or duck to like line their nests. And the way that it's harvested is they wait until the chicks have been raised and leave the nest, and then the nests are abandoned, and then they harvest the down that's left, which is also what makes it very expensive, because by that time there's not very much down left, so it takes quite a lot. But apparently it's extremely soft, softer than goose down. The reason that I added them to the list is because of the sound they make, and I love it.
Have a listen to these ducks in Scotland. I think they're called eider ducks. And it sounds like they've just been told some juicy gossip.
And just the way he described it in that video, they sound like they've just been told some juicy gossip. It's really funny. I love it. Sea turtle. Obviously, we all know sea turtles. We live on Key Biscayne. The sea turtles live on Key Biscayne. So we've all seen these guys. Now, I wanted to start with this picture because one of the things that distinguishes sea turtles from, regular terrestrial turtles, many things, but one in particular are their legs, which obviously are flippers. They're clearly designed to live in the water and not on land. Whereas you look at terrestrial turtles, this is a Florida box turtle. Is Chris Biggers here? No, she's not here. This is actually one of her old box turtles. I took a picture when I was at her house. And clearly, they have little legs and feet. They can't actually swim, but they spend a lot of their time on the floor or on the ground. And then this is my turtle. This is Taco. And he spends about 95% of his time in the water. But as you can see, he still clearly has feet. They're webbed, and they are a little bit more like flippers, but they're still very much legs and feet. So what we're going to talk about is the fly river turtle, or the pig-nosed turtle, native to Australia. A lot of these animals are in Australia and New Zealand, because that's where all the crazy stuff is. They are a 100% freshwater turtle, and they have flippers, like a sea turtle. They're adorable. Their nose looks like a pig, hence pig-nosed turtle. They are related to soft-shell turtles, which also have a little bit of a pig-looking nose. But they're different in that they have the kind of leathery skin on their back like a soft-shell turtle, but instead of being really flat, they still have a domed back the way other regular turtles. They're kind of some weird in-between. They are the last living species in their genus and species. So they while related, they are fairly separated from other types of turtles. Like I said, they're fully aquatic. They, just like sea turtles, they only ever come out of the water to lay their eggs. They are also highly trafficked in the pet trade. They're apparently very aggressive as pets. They don't like people. They don't want to be kept, but people love them, so they keep trying to traffic them. One of the most interesting things about them, too, is their egg incubation. So I know about sea turtles, obviously. I've talked to you guys about sea turtles before. They incubate their eggs, loggerheads in particular, 8 to 9 weeks. It varies slightly with environmental factors like temperature. But if you go past 9 weeks, your eggs are probably not going to hatch. There's something wrong. It got too hot. They baked. Maybe the female was infertile. Could have been any number of reasons. But if you're past 9 weeks, your eggs are not going to hatch. They have this crazy range where their eggs can incubate from anywhere from 64 days to 107 days. And once the eggs are fully developed into hatchlings, the hatchlings themselves can delay their hatching for up to another 50 days. And because they all hatch together at the same time based on environmental factors. So once they sense that the rainy season has come, they will all hatch at once. So it kind of doesn't matter when they were laid, they all hatch at the same time. And it's a numbers game because obviously that's for conservation reasons. It's one of the reasons that sea turtles lay 100 eggs in one nest because then they have a better chance of making it to the water without being picked off by predators. So in that way, that makes sense. But the fact that they have this crazy range and they can delay their own hatching for 50 days is just a really strange adaptation. Probably most of you recognize this. It is an isopod, also known as a roly-poly or a pill bug. They, live in the dirt. They're good for the environment. They eat decaying matter and things like that. I'm going to talk about one of its relatives. Most isopods, by the way, they actually live in the water, the majority of the species. This is actually an outlier that lives on land. But we're going to talk about the giant marine isopod, which is the stuff of nightmares. So the largest ones can be up to 20 inches long. They look just like the one that I just showed you, just enormous. They can be a nuisance to fishermen. Even though they are generally scavengers, they have been known to attack fish or attack other animals. So when you have a lot of fish that are stuck in trawl nets and things like that, the isopods will sometimes go into the nets and attack fish, so they can be an issue for fishermen. The majority of the species are found in very, very deep water, 7,000 feet deep. They can come a little bit shallower than that, but they are benthic, which means that they stay on the floor, the sea floor. They don't swim around really. Very recently, I saw, I want to say it was maybe 2 weeks ago, a video was released of a deep sea camera that was recording some area. And I think they were looking for some specific type of animal. I don't remember exactly what the video was about. But on that video, a small shark was hanging out, kind of looking at what was going on. And all of a sudden, it got attacked by a giant isopod. And it was frightening. It literally just like curled up and wrapped around the shark, and then they were just flipping around. And I was going to include that, but then I thought it was too gross. And, you know, not a lot of time. So everybody knows what squirrels are. We see them all the time. They're very cute. They're a little annoying, but they're super cute everywhere, you know, very common. The Indian giant squirrel, not as common, becoming less common, as most of these are. It looks like a cartoon. Those are not, again, photoshopped colors. That is the color of the squirrel. There are actually 3 subspecies. That's the most colorful of the subspecies. This one only has 2 colors. It's like maroon and cream. They can have 1, 2, or 3 color combinations of 5 or 6 different colors. They usually don't have more than 3, though. They're found in the woodlands of India. They're not uncommon, but they are becoming less common just because they don't tolerate, you know, human presence and development and things like that. So their populations are becoming a little bit more fragmented. But they're in a lot of different areas throughout India. I've been to India several times. I've never seen one yet. I'm always looking. They're about the size of a cat, a small cat. And other than that, they're not actually that remarkable besides the color. The color and the size is what makes them very interesting. Other than that, they're just like any other squirrel. They spread seeds, they help forests grow, they chirp and, you know, do whatever. But they're just really beautiful. And the colors just seem so unnatural. They're so pretty. Also, you don't tend to see a lot of very colorful mammals. You know, you see colorful birds and colorful lizards and fish and things like that. You don't see a lot of mammals that are very colorful, and it's like a rainbow mammal. We all know, again, this is a Portuguese man-of-war. They wash up constantly on the beach. Some seasons of the year are worse than others. The reason we all know what this is, one, because we see them, but also you guys know they sting, so we know to look out for them. And they sting from their tentacles. They're not really tentacles, but just the parts that hang down. This is actually not a great example because it's not a true jellyfish, but it was close enough, and it was one that I knew that everybody would know what it is. But what we're going to talk about is the Irukandji. This is one, possibly if you've been to Australia, you may have been warned about it. It is a box jelly, which is box jellies in general. There are several different species of box jelly. They are known for their very, very painful stings. But the Irukandji is deadly. So first of all, the biggest problem with them is that they're about this big. And they're see-through. So if you're in the water and a little 1 centimeter jellyfish is near you, you're not going to see it. It's very unlikely that you're going to see it. They cause what's called Irukandji syndrome. And it's named after the Irukandji people that used to live on that coastline. They're on the north side of Australia, I believe. One of the interesting things about them is that they don't just sting from their tentacles, they also sting from the bell. So you literally can't touch it anywhere. So, you know, with the man-of-war, you can grab it by that giant bubble and pick it up, and it's not going to hurt you. It's only if you touch the tentacles that it's going to sting you and it's going to hurt. These guys, you can't even do that. You touch them anywhere and they're going to sting you. But the worst part about it is that they'll sting you and you won't know. There's a delayed response. It averages about 30 minutes delayed response, but it can be anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour. So you might have already left the beach and you're having lunch at a restaurant and then you start feeling it. And then it's like, well, did I just eat something bad or did I get stung by a jellyfish? You have no idea. So Irukandji syndrome can cause extreme pain, vomiting, difficulty breathing, brain hemorrhages, and death. We don't know how many people have died from being stung by Irukandji. Because of the delayed onset, a lot of people, they go to the hospital and their death is attributed to a heart attack or some other issue that they might be having. And so they don't know that, and it's so small, its sting is really small. So if they don't find it, they don't find the mark, then you have no idea. So we don't actually know how many people have died. A lot of people do live from it. There is no cure immediately. They just treat it symptomatically, but eventually you get over it and it gets better. It's not something that will keep coming back or anything like that. Most people, as far as we know, do live if they get treatment. But like I said, how many people have died from it, we don't actually know. Parakeets we see all over the place. None of them are actually from here, by the way. We don't have any endemic parrots to Florida, but we have so many that live here because they've all come for various reasons that people brought them. However, this parrot species, the Kākāpō, endemic to New Zealand, is a very adorable and interesting one. It cannot fly. It is the only species of parrot in the world that cannot fly. It's too heavy and fat. It runs around on the ground like that one is doing right there. It can actually jog for several miles if it needs to. And also, despite the fact they can't fly, you might see them in the tops of trees, and that is because they are excellent climbers. So they use their beak, their wings, and their feet, and they claw their way up into trees and sit there like they flew there, trying to trick everybody into thinking they could fly. They were almost wiped out in New Zealand because of the introduction of things like cats and dogs and ferrets, rats, things like that, because the reason they grew this way have what's called mild case of island gigantism, which is basically what happens when you have a species that is marooned on an island, separated from everything else, and in this case, there is plenty of food available and no predators. So they lose their ability to get away from predators because they don't need to. And there's plenty of food, so they don't need to fly to find food. They don't need to fly anywhere to find mates. So they just eventually get really big. These guys lost their ability to fly. And then you introduce a cat, and it's like a cat in a candy store. There's nothing they can do. They can run for a while, but a cat is going to be able to catch up with that easily. However, there are a lot of conservation programs going on right now. They're being introduced to other islands that have been made predator-free. Their population is still tenuous, but it is slowly growing. The maleo is a very interesting bird. My list was more than twice this long when I was putting together this presentation. It was hard to whittle it down to just 20 animals. So I have enough to do another one of these presentations if you want me to. This was one I had actually never heard of, and I thought it was super interesting. The maleo is also known as the volcano bird. And they live in certain areas, specifically Sulawesi Island in Indonesia. And it's a volcanic island. They evolved to live in and around volcanoes. And they use volcanoes to get out of parenting. Unlike every other bird I've ever heard of, they don't raise their young. They lay a single egg, and they bury it in the hot sands or hot ash around volcanoes, and then they leave. Like a sea turtle. They're just like, I'm done, that's all, I did my job. And that's it. That egg is completely on its own. So, because of that, similar to the desert rain frog, this guy doesn't have any parents, so when he's born, fully feathered and ready to fly. And they dig their way out of the ground like a baby sea turtle and fly away, and they're ready to go. So this is just a quick little video. I'm not going to play the whole video. But this just shows them, these are like the sands around the volcano, so it's very warm. And they're just digging their nests with their feet. So these are mating pairs that are finding areas to nest, to lay their eggs. They're very pretty when they get older. And the young ones, when they're born, look completely different. You would think it was a different species. And this is a minute long. Hopefully there's enough time, but I want to play the whole video. This is a baby maleo that is hatched and is digging its way out of the ground. Already you can see it's a completely different color. It's a yellowish kind of greenish yellow as opposed to that pink and black that the adults have. So there he comes out of the nest hole. And they're very small. One of the things I didn't mention, the maleo, a full-grown maleo is about the size of a chicken, so they're not huge. But their eggs are 5 times the size of a chicken egg. So that's a baby maleo. He's very green and yellow. And there, he just took off and he's up in a tree. He's literally 30 seconds old and he's already flying. Very interesting species. Also, I love the whole here, this volcano will take care of my child. I don't need to. This is one that you guys have definitely heard of if you haven't seen it. That's a piranha. They are native to South America. They do have a much worse reputation than they should. If you jump in a pool full of piranha, generally they're not going to eat you. However, they do get this reputation when they live in pools that shrink over time because for some reason it just got cut off from its water supply, or it's a hot season, there's not a lot of rain, and then you have a lot of them in one small pool and they run out of food, then it's a little bit worse. But generally, unless you're like sick or dying, they're not really going to come after you. Anyway, that's not even relevant to this presentation. The piranha is a very interesting fish on its own, but it has a relative, and they share a lot of the same habitats, called the pacu. Now, piranha, as you may know, have very pointy, very sharp teeth, and that is for ripping flesh. They are carnivores. Pacu also have teeth, but their teeth are weird, and they look like human teeth, and it makes them very creepy just because of that. I'm like, whose dentures did you steal? That's weird. The pacu, however, are omnivorous. They will eat meat, but they generally more eat plants. And because of this, they don't need to be as fast as the piranha. They don't need to be as aggressive as a piranha. They grow much larger. They can grow up to 3.5 feet long and weigh 90 pounds. As I mentioned, you can see in these pictures, they have these really weird human-like teeth. And like I said, it's because they're omnivores, and so are we. We're omnivores, so that is the kind of teeth that an omnivore develops. It's weird to see it in a fish. Like you see that in like deer, you know, or bears or something. Due to the pet trade, they have actually expanded, or have become invasive, I should say, in countries all over the world now, and they are a huge nuisance. We have them here in Florida. People release them. Because they get so big, and people don't expect them to get that big. They can't handle them. They don't have the tank space. They release them. They start breeding. So they're in a lot of places now. So I guess that one's not endangered. That's one of the few that aren't endangered. Peacock mantis shrimp. It is possible that you may know somebody that has one as a pet. A lot of people keep them. They can be difficult to keep. They're super, super pretty arthropods. They're crustaceans, I should say. They're related to shrimp and lobsters and things like that. Extremely colorful. There are different types of mantis shrimp. The peacock mantis shrimp in particular is the very colorful one. These are like the different colors. We don't really know specifically why, but one of the reasons that they're so colorful to us is because to themselves, like this, if they saw this with our eyes, they'd be like, that's not colorful. Humans have 3 color receptive cones in our eyes. And the peacock mantis shrimp has anywhere from 12 to 16 color receptive cones. They can see ultraviolet light. They can see polarized light. They can see types of light that we absolutely cannot perceive. And so for them, the color that they perceive is far beyond anything that we can even imagine. So they have excellent eyesight. They can probably see your soul. They can just see so much more than we can. It's very, very cool to think about. But the other really interesting thing about them is that they have a dactyl club. It's an appendage called a dactyl club. And what they use that for is to punch things. So they punch their prey. They'll punch each other if they're fighting. They will punch predators if they feel threatened. And what's crazy about this punch is that the acceleration of the punch at its peak is the same as a .22 caliber bullet being shot from a handgun. When it does that underwater, what happens is it creates what's called a cavitation bubble. That very fast movement is so fast that the water can't like compensate for that, like the way air does. And so it creates a cavitation bubble because of the pressure change. And when that cavitation bubble bursts, it releases an enormous amount of light and heat. But this is a cavitation bubble that's about this big. It's a super, super tiny bubble because the shrimp are only about maybe 5-6 inches long. But that light and heat, the heat in particular, weakens their prey, and it makes their punch that much more powerful. So this is a small video. It's a slowed down version, because obviously it's a very fast punch, but it captures the cavitation bubble burst.
Oh, wow.
So, and you can see it literally broke right through that snail shell. Right after the light burst, you'll see the hole in the snail shell. So they're super interesting. Pelagic nudibranchs. Now this isn't a single species because it's impossible to talk about just one of them because they're all super weird. Nudibranchs, again, if you've had a fish tank or know somebody that has a saltwater fish tank, they might have nudibranchs in there. The more sort of common ones, they're very colorful, they're really pretty. I always killed them, so I stopped trying to keep them. They're really fragile. But most of the ones that you see in the fish trade are like this. They're sea slugs that are very colorful, very flashy. They're very cool looking. But pelagic nudibranchs, pelagic means open water. And the reason they're a little bit more interesting to me is because they don't live near surfaces, so they don't have anything to crawl on. They're literally, for them, the entire world has no hard surfaces. So they could never live in a fish tank, because if they hit the side, they might damage themselves, because they are literally evolved to not be around any hard surface. So they are related to sea slugs, which is why the first ones I showed you look kind of like slugs, just very, fancy slugs. But these guys, they just live out in the open water. A lot of them will be translucent, and that is basically camouflage from predators. If they're translucent and there's no light, kind of hard to see them. This one's called a sea angel, and this is what they look like. And they swim around, they're very pretty. They just kind of flap their little wings on the side, and they look really cool. And then they see prey, and their head explodes, and they grab the prey. They're very tricky. I don't know what this one is called, but it just looked really weird. This one is a sea dragon, and this one actually does live, it's more closely related to the ones I showed you on this previous slide. It does need a surface, actually, to hold on to, but this one is actually in somebody's fish tank, which is why you can see the gravel next to it. But they do live out in the open ocean also, and what they use as a surface to cling to is the water table. So they will swim upside down with their sticky foot sticking to the underside of the water tension. That's the only surface they have to hold on to. And then I have this really funny video that I found, and really it's the music that made it perfect. I can't take credit for the music. But this is a different type of pelagic nudibranch. I was like, whoever made this video found the perfect music for it. It's actually a much longer video, but time. I was like, okay, it's a disco slug, basically. By the way, pelagic nudibranchs, all over the world. They're everywhere. And nudibranchs, for that, regular nudibranchs. The quokka is an animal. If you guys saw the flyer, it was on the flyer. We're back in Australia. It has been dubbed the world's happiest animal. Just so everyone's aware, it's not actually smiling. That's literally just how its face looks. Some of us have resting bitch face. Some of us have resting happy face. Excuse my language. It is the only member of its genus, and it is a marsupial, so it's related distantly to kangaroos and wombats and things like that. It's very small. Again, it's about the size of a large cat, so about 11 pounds at its biggest. And it lives in a very small range in southwest Australia. There's about 14,000 of them total, and 12,000 of them live on Rottnest Island. Because of their super happy face, in the mid-2010s or so, there was a huge trend of people taking selfies with quokkas. So Rottnest Island had a huge surge in tourists. But this was a very, very, you can find these all over the web, all these people taking selfies with quokkas. And the reason they can do this is because, aside from the fact that they look happy, they're pretty friendly, and they're not scared of humans at all. They'll just come right up to you and be like, what's up? Let's be friends, and they just want to hang out. However, one thing they do that I was debating whether or not to mention this, but I think I should, just because I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression and think that they're amazing. If they are threatened by a predator, they have been known to either drop or throw their joey, their baby, at the predator and run away. I had to ruin the smiley face, I'm sorry. It is an escape tactic. It's a sad one. It's one that they do avoid doing if they can, but sometimes they're like, well, I'll just make another one. Sorry, that was dark. Next, the shoebill stork. This was also on the flyer, if you guys saw the flyer. This one is one of my favorites, and I'm not really sure why. I think it's because it's a little bit creepy. It's actually more closely related to a pelican than a stork, but the name just stuck because that's what it was called for a long time. It's found only in the freshwater swamps of tropical Africa So it is landlocked within Africa. You don't find it on the coastline, and it doesn't migrate. It doesn't really like to fly more than 20 meters if it can avoid it. It will go up to 200 meters if it has to, but that's pretty much it. They don't really like to fly much. They stand about 4 to 5 feet tall, so slightly shorter than me. They have this crazy, gigantic beak that they use actually for communication. They do what's called bill clattering, which is basically banging their beak together very quickly, and they use that to communicate with each other. And sometimes while they're doing that, they might let out some kind of whine or a cow-like moo, and that combined with the clattering makes some very strange sounds. The clattering itself, because their beak is so big and it's hollow, it makes a very, very loud sound that sounds a bit like a machine gun. So you can see its bill actually moving. If you didn't know what that was, that would scare the living daylights out of you. They are generally silent though. They're very quiet birds, and when they do make sounds, that's the sound they make. They also are known to stand perfectly still for extremely long periods of time and just stare. And that's what I'm showing here. This is not a photo. This is a video of a very creepy, is it playing? Oh, there it goes. Now it's a video. And you can tell it's a video because it's raining. And not only is it just standing there being creepy in the rain, it's just staring at this guy who's taking the video and like staring into his soul. Just being super weird. And this is normal. This is totally normal behavior for them. They'll just stand there and stare at you. And just look how wide their beak is compared to their head. It's so much bigger. It's really strange. So that's a buffalo. Most of you, I'm sure, know that's a buffalo. And some guy who apparently really loves his buffalo. This is a regular sized buffalo. They can actually get larger than this depending on the species, but in agriculture, people have buffalo about this size is pretty normal. That buffalo probably stands, I would say his head would be about here. They have buffalo that are much bigger and wider and just gigantic, like 2,000 pounds. This one I would guess is probably close to like 900, 1,000. But what we're going to talk about is the tamaraw, which is the only endemic species of buffalo in the Philippines. And this one actually exhibits something that is the opposite of the Kākāpō, which is island dwarfism. So a lot of times when a species gets stranded on an island, the opposite thing happens that I mentioned before, which is now they are very large, there are limited resources on an island, and they have nowhere to go. And so over time, they evolve to be smaller and smaller and smaller. And that is so they can conserve energy, they can conserve resources, and they can live basically within their means on the island. So the tamaraw looks just like a buffalo. It's really hard to tell looking at that is not just a regular buffalo. I tried to include this picture to show you how short it is compared to the grass that's growing there. The tamaraw only stands about this tall, and it's a buffalo. So it gets like 400 or 500 pounds, which, is still pretty sizable but it's a buffalo, so they're very wide and muscly and heavy. But it's generally, as far as like height and maybe a little bit more in length, about the size of a Great Dane, which is just really, it's hard to describe how strange that would be unless you see it in person. Because looking at pictures, not really remarkable. It just looks like a regular buffalo. If you look here, these are all different species of buffalo. That's the largest one. That's the one I was saying probably stands about this tall. It's huge. And then this last one here is the tamaraw, the size of a very large dog. They are very reclusive. They're shy. They stay away from people. They are not used in agriculture at all. The entire population is wild. They can't really be used for agriculture, one, because they don't like people, so they stay away. But also, they're not particularly useful for agriculture. And they just don't domesticate well. They've tried to do breeding programs. They are endangered, and they have lost a lot of habitat, so their population has declined. The breeding programs are mediocre at best, because they just don't do well in captivity. But they are a very interesting island dwarfism. If you're ever bored one day and you need to occupy your time, just Google island dwarfism, and look at some of the weird animals that you find. They're so strange because they look so much like the original animal, but then they're like tiny. And finally, this is actually my favorite animal. Not this one, but what I'm going to talk about. Obviously, that's a snail. This is a normal snail. This is the kind of snail you might see any day of the week. But we are going to talk about the volcano snail. The volcano snail lives along the hydrothermal vents in the Indian Ocean. Hydrothermal vents, by the way, are where very, very hot gases escape from the mantle. It's basically underwater volcanic activity. They can get up to 750 degrees Fahrenheit, extremely hot. The snails don't live in that area. They kind of hang out in the area where the hot water from the vents mixes with the cold water of the ocean. But the area where they stay still tends to be about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very hot. Well beyond boiling, but because it's under a lot of pressure because it's on the sea floor, it doesn't actually boil. It just gets very hot. They take in a lot of the chemicals and things that come out of the hydrothermal vents, and that includes iron sulfide. So it's very hard for animals that use calcium carbonate to create their shells to live in areas like this because the hydrothermal vents can create very acidic water, and acid dissolves calcium carbonate. So the snail that I showed on the previous slide, that's a calcium carbonate shell. All the shells you find on the beach are the same. These guys can't really do that. So they build their shells with iron. They use iron sulfides, including greigite and pyrite, to build their shells, which is why a lot of them tend to be black in color. They also form these things called sclerites that most shells don't have, which is one of the reasons they're called the scaly foot gastropod. And these are also made of iron sulfide, and they're basically scales that protect the foot of the snail, and probably protects it in a lot of different ways from predators. There are crabs that live down there that would probably attack them, but then also seem to harbor some kind of bacteria, and the bacteria seems to help them in collecting iron sulfide to add to their sclerites. So this one is also, this is the same thing, it's just a slightly different concentration of chemicals, which is why it's a lighter color. Most of them tend to be this black color. And they're literally metal, like they are rock stars of the deep sea. They are made of metal, and the best part, I think, for me, is that the greigite makes them magnetic. So if you wanted to just go down there with like a really strong magnet, collect snails, you could actually do that. I think we are out of time, and that is my last animal. So basically the conclusion is that evolution is very creative and very weird. And thank you. And if you guys do want me to do another presentation like this, I have, my list was very long. It was difficult to whittle it down to just 20 animals, but I knew I would not have time for more than that. I also, in the process of doing this, I found a lot of interesting things so I might at some point do a presentation that's just, 20 crazy natural phenomenon that happen around the world that you haven't heard of, because there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on that nobody talks about. So yeah, go ahead. So there's a few different reasons. There's a lot of speculation about why Australia is so extreme. And part of it is that it has been separated from the rest of the continents longer. It's been an island and separate for a lot longer. If you remember back to second grade when they taught about Pangea, which is the supercontinent, that eventually all the continents moved and broke off from that. Australia separated way before everybody else, I think. And so it's been separated a lot longer, so things there have been more extreme. It's essentially because, it's a little too large to say the same as island dwarfism or island gigantism, but just this separation. It's also gone through a lot of changes. So there are actually fossils in central Australia that show that there was at one point an entire swath of Australia in the middle was completely underwater. And so over time, there's just a lot of really strange things that have happened to that landmass. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of extreme environments there, and so I think that's also part of the reason. So you have these animals that are predators trying to, get their prey. So snakes, for instance, that are super venomous, they need something that's going to affect their prey very quickly. you know, they may not have the energy to like chase it down if it doesn't die right away. So then they become, in response to that, more venomous and more deadly. That's just an example. But yeah, as far as the rest of it, I couldn't really say. I mean, at least half of the animals I talked about were in Australia and New Zealand. So well, I couldn't say for sure why, but it is definitely, you know, it is the joke that Australia, everything there is trying to kill you. Are there any other questions? All right, thank you guys. I appreciate it.